City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm KERVIN, President of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at Portland State University, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. Today we are excited to be part of the Raising Our Hands, Raising the Bar Summit discussing student success. But first, some announcements. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partner, Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP, Barron Liebman, Iberdrola Renewables, Perkins Coie, Portland General Electric, and Providence Health and Services. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. Join us next week for a few different City Club events. On Wednesday, we will be at Migration Brewing for a Meet the Entrepreneur speed networking event. And on Thursday, New Leaders Collective invites you to join them for an event on emerging technologies and the sharing economy. At our featured Friday Forum next week, prominent national Indigenous leaders will discuss how the use of traditional cultural practices are intentionally creating more prosperous communities. You can learn more about club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. And now a quick pitch for our annual fund. Because we all love Portland, we need to make it better. Better for Portlanders, and here at City Club, membership, event attendance, the number of research projects completed, the visibility and impact of City Club is up and increasing. We are becoming a younger, more racially diverse organization focused on serving all of Portland. We feel we are doing a good job, but there's much more to do. Portland still has too many unmet civic needs. Today, we are asking for your support, $25, $50, $100, so that we can build a club for every Portlander. You will find donation envelopes on your seats. Please fill them out and give them to a City Club staff member or associate at the end of today's program. And thank you for your support. As always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag PDXCityClub. Today's moderator, SUSHEELA JAYAPAL, will facilitate a question and answer session with the audience and our guests. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all our audience members, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. Hold your cards up high, and a City Club staff member will collect them prior to the start of Q&A. And now for our program. We wanted to take a quick moment to once again thank Portland State University for hosting us today, and also to the morning program sponsor, the America's Promise Alliance, with premier sponsor AT&T. This event is one of more than 100 community summits being held across the country through America's Promise Alliance's Grad Nation. We are excited to hear from today's panel on the topic, Meeting Our Schools on Their Edges to Align Action. We'll be featuring the work of the All Hands Raise Partnership, a collective impact partnership working to improve educational outcomes for children and youth throughout Multnomah County. In addition to their work in Portland and Multnomah County, the partnership is making an influence statewide and at the national level. All Hands Raised is one of the regional achievement collaboratives designated by the state of Oregon to build cross-sector education strategies, and in this role, All Hands acts as a mentor to Oregon communities who are in earlier stages of their work. The partnership is one of only a handful of communities that is considered a national model and was recently awarded the Cradle to Career Champion Award by the National Cradle to Career Network. I will turn it over to our moderator for this panel. SUSHEELA JAYAPAL was a founding co-chair of the steering committee that helped build the All Hands Raised partnership and served for 6 years on the All Hands Raised board. She also serves on the boards of Metropolitan Family Service, Literary Arts, and the Regional Arts and Culture Council. She will introduce our panelists and get us going. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you so much to City Club for putting this topic on your agenda, for being flexible about the location. We really appreciate it. And of course, thank you to Portland State for hosting not only this discussion, but the All Hands Raised conference that took place this morning. Let me start by introducing our panelists. To my left, Rob Saxton. Rob is Oregon's Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction, where he manages all of Oregon's K-12 education systems. Carmen Rubio. Carmen is Executive Director of Latino Network, a community-based organization that provides services and advocacy for Latino youth and families throughout Multnomah County. She also serves on the board of All Hands Raised and as a member of the State of Oregon's Higher Education Coordinating Council. Vim Vivell. Vim is the president of Portland State University, the state of Oregon's largest university. He also serves as a board member for All Hands Raised and for the Coalition of Urban Serving Communities. And finally, Dan Ryan. Dan is CEO of All Hands Raised, where he helps guide the community's collective effort to improve outcomes for Multnomah County's kids from cradle to career. Thank you all so much for being here. I thought I would start with a little bit of background about the work of All Hands Raised and about this phrase that we are all using, collective impact, collective action, and collective impact. And I realize some of that's going to be repeated information for those of you who were here this morning or who have been involved with this work for a long time, but it might be helpful to those of you who are new to this work and to our statewide audience. So to start, a little bit with background about All Hands Raised. All Hands Raised was founded about 4 years ago, and sort of unusually, it came through the dissolution of 2 previously existing groups that had been working on education issues around the city and around the county. And those were the Leaders Roundtable and the Mayor's Education Cabinet. Those 2 groups voluntarily, they decided to dissolve themselves in order to create one larger, broader, community-wide and county-wide effort. And at that point, All Hands Raised was selected to lead that effort and began building what we now call the All Hands Raised Partnership. The idea behind the partnership was this idea of collective impact, collective action leading to collective impact. The idea that if we can bring together all sectors in our community that work on these issues, schools, government, not-for-profits, community-based organizations, businesses, and communities, parents and families, if we can bring all of those sectors together, if we can align those sectors and align the programs that they were all working on, that we could have a greater impact on our community than we were able to have individually. So sort of to look at that another way, I think one of the things that the leaders who put this together identified was that our failure to achieve the kinds of educational results we wanted to achieve weren't about being program poor. It wasn't about not having enough programs. It wasn't about schools not doing their jobs. We have lots of programs. Our schools work very hard. It wasn't about programs not doing well or not achieving results. Individual programs, most of them, achieve great results in individual cases. So lots of programs doing good work, and yet we weren't moving the needle community-wide. And the idea was that if we can act collectively instead of individually, if we can bring all of those organizations and programs and sectors around a set of shared objectives, assume shared accountability and responsibility for those objectives, bridge the gaps between the systems that work in this space, that we could have community-wide impact. And so that was sort of the idea, the founding idea behind this partnership. When the partnership was founded, our stakeholders made some early decisions that you'll see outlined in a pamphlet that you have on your tables. It goes into a little bit more detail, but I'll just kind of highlight a couple of things. The first thing that our stakeholders did, and I'm now talking about that group of sectors, the first thing they did was identify a set of indicators. These are points along the cradle to post-secondary, cradle to career spectrum where they felt those were the ideal, the best intervention points to ensure that our children move through that system. And you'll see that line of indicators on the first page of the pamphlet. The next thing they did was to identify 4 areas of strategic focus that they thought we ought to spend our time on. And those 4 areas, and I'm going to turn to my notes and read them. Those 4 areas, also outlined a little bit more detail in your pamphlet, were eliminating racial inequities impacting students of color, ensuring all of our students are prepared for kindergarten, linking community supports with schools to keep all students engaged with school, and providing learning opportunities for academically at-risk students entering 9th grade. So those were the 4 areas of strategic focus that our stakeholders identified. And again, those groups and some of the outcomes that we're already seeing are outlined in the brochure on your table. So with that bit of background, I want to turn to our panel and to some questions. One note on process, I'm not going to ask each panelist to answer every question, but we do want to make this as fluid and conversational as we can within the constraints of time and a panel setup. So please, if you hear something that another panelist says that strikes a thought or a question, feel free to chime in. Maybe give me a little signal, maybe wave your microphone or something so that I don't jump to the next question too quickly and cut you off. But that would be great if we could have a conversation about some of these. All right. So first question, this one's going to be for Carmen and Vim, and Vim, I'll ask you to go first. You're both longtime leaders in this work, both the work of the All Hands Raised Partnership and the work of improving educational outcomes for kids long before that. You know, in terms of describing the work, I know that I personally find it easy to describe the vision. The vision is all children are successful, but the work itself is very complicated, and describing the work can be very complicated. The elevator speech is a little bit hard to come up with sometimes. So for each of you, how do you explain this vision of all parts of the community working together to improve outcomes? And what sets it apart? Why is it different? Why isn't it just rearranging the furniture on the deck? We're all doing the same things, but we're doing it in a slightly different way. Vim.
Well, let's take a slow elevator so we have some time to explain it. You know, it used to be in higher education that when we'd be unhappy about the quality of the students that we got, we would blame the high schools, right? They're not doing their job. And I assumed that the high schools would say, well, these students, you know, we can only do so much because the grade schools aren't really doing their job. And I assumed the grade schools would say, well, if only preschool was there, and I guess the preschools had no choice but to blame mom, right? That if only the families did the right job. And it was this model of where everybody thought in a siloed way. What is wonderful to me about this cradle-to-career model that All Hands Raised represent, and that's been really replicated from models elsewhere, is the sense, of course, that it's a pipeline. That it starts, really in many ways it starts at birth or even earlier. And everything that everybody does, the schools, the families, the community, everything that everybody does along that way or fails to do is going to, you know, have to be corrected later or is an asset later. So I became very aware of this sense that, no, we can't just sort of blame the other guy for not doing it, apart from the fact, of course, that Portland State educates more of the teachers who work in the school system than anybody else. So if something goes wrong at the lower level, we probably have to look at what we haven't done. But it is a pathway. It's a pipeline. And I love the idea about this cradle-to-career model that we didn't just then say, all right, so everything we do to improve anything, anywhere, anytime is wonderful. No, we decided collectively again to identify what are the key intervention points and what are the key things we know about success. We know it's about attending kindergarten. It's about knowing how to read by 3rd grade. It's being in class in 9th grade and so on. And picking on those particular points and getting all the programs that exist in the area to align as much as possible. It's still a work in progress. We're not there yet. So All Hands Raised did not come in saying, we have the solution, everybody get out of the way, we got this brand new shiny program, which happens very often. Somebody has the shiny brand new object and says everybody else doesn't know what they're doing, we know what they're doing. No, All Hands Raised is saying everybody is doing a lot of great things, but we're not necessarily aligned, we're not coordinated, and that's why we're not getting the maximum impact of them. So let's work on that, and very much let's measure it. Let's not just claim success. We're all good at telling stories of success. But you know what? One story of success does not make up for 100 cases of failure, which you don't talk about. So this approach is very data-driven. What is happening with ninth grade attendance? What is happening with graduation? What is happening with absenteeism in kindergarten, if you can believe it? And are we moving the needle through the programs that all of us collectively are running? And then we put out an annual report on this so people can see where the progress is at. So as I said, this was an elevator ride to the 105th story, but so it takes a little while, but I think that's what All Hands Raised is about. It's about the pipeline, it's about collective action, and it's about data-driven accountability.
Thank you. Carmen, what do you think? Why is this different?
So for us, I'll talk a little bit about a different facet of the partnership. And what makes this a different effort is from other previous education efforts is All Hands Raised strong focus on equity, and more specifically racial equity. Any project is defined by who's at the table, and at this table it was set very intentionally to maximize learning, collaboration, and encourage relationship building across the community, and actually to really intentionally engage community leadership that is reflective of the students and families that are being served. And that was a key cornerstone of this collaboration, that we have engaged leadership that has been leading within these communities for decades upon decades. So there's a lot of wisdom in those communities that was not being integrated into civic dialogue a lot of the time. Another aspect of this collaboration, it provides access and creates new relationships where there wasn't an opportunity to do that before. I can speak as a new nonprofit director coming in at a time when this effort was just starting to get underway. I previously did not have any relationships in place or engage with many of the businesses or education leaders that I do now, but for this opportunity and but for this collaboration, because my issues are elevated, my community's issues, I should say, and other communities' issues are elevated with the same and equal importance as any other person at the table, and that is a critical way that we can only with honesty and dialogue and understanding the realities that exist within every sector of this community can we really move the dial on these issues. Also, all members identified equity as our #1 priority with, again, like I said before, an explicit focus on racial equity. And that's what really sets this endeavor apart, even, I believe, from our national peers. And it's the idea that we're all in this together and that we're all responsible for the success of the same child. We take different actions, or we have different roles with that child, but this is a community effort, and we are responsible for the community's children. So All Hands Raised has also built a strong partnership with the Coalition of Communities of Color, and we lead this equity work together, and that's another important aspect. The partnership has, because of that collaboration with the coalition, it has helped to elevate the discussion of racial equity to unprecedented levels in Multnomah County across all sectors. So that's another important aspect. So today we're continuing to prioritize strong, authentic relationships, build upon honesty, equity, but with a clear focus on kids and outcomes. So we think this will be the solid foundation to weather any future issues as they arise, as they will.
Thank you. A slightly different sort of perspective on that question for you, Rob. You're leading the state's K-12 public education system. You've worked at all levels of education from teacher on up. We often say in our work that the schools can't do it alone, so a piece of this collaboration is about not focusing simply on what happens within the four walls of a classroom. It actually takes every sector of the community focused together to improve outcomes. Can you share your reflections on what that looks like? What does it actually look like for schools and communities to work together about improving specific outcomes?
Well, I appreciate you asking me a little bit about sort of my history as or mentioning at least my history as an educator, certainly in Oregon. And so I do have a perspective of classroom teacher, assistant principal, principal, superintendent, and now in the role that I have. And it's interesting to think back on that, what I thought about each of those things and what my place was in that at different parts along the continuum of my career. So as a classroom teacher, I really felt oftentimes very much alone. I mean, you're in the classroom, you have your students, and you're thinking, I really am very much responsible for what's happening here, and by the way, where is everybody else, and what have they done, and does your mom know that that's what you have on today? And so, you know, it is, you know, where are the parents? Where is the administration? How are people going to help me do my absolute dead level best to help you be a learner? And I was a high school math teacher, right? So whatever perspective that brings, but trying to think about that and where are people who can help me actually do this. As a high school principal, I really thought about it as, I think that the noble thing for us to do is to take complete responsibility. This is on us. And we're not going to look anyplace else. We're not going to talk about anything else. We need to get this done. Not because I really necessarily thought that was the case, but because I felt like unless you take complete responsibility and do everything that you possibly can think of to do on behalf of kids, that you're not doing everything that you should. And so really thinking about it that way. When I moved into the superintendency, I began to see it differently. Not at first, but then started thinking, how do we reach out? And who is there that's out there that can help us with this? And this needs to be bigger. There are things that we're really good at in K-12, but there's a bunch of things that we're not very good at. So for this child to be successful, for this family to be successful, and to give the kind of support that this child really needs, who can we bring into this and begin to work with? Who can help us engage with the family to understand how this all works, to ask the right questions, and to really build a coalition that will cause or help us to be as successful as we possibly can be with children, but ultimately for our children to be successful. And it gives you the sense of we need to quit really worrying about who's doing it and who's not doing it, and just know that the main emphasis here is what's going to happen with this child? What are they going to learn? And what kind of opportunities are they going to have for the rest of their lifetime because of the experience that we give them as a K-12 school system, but also that the entire community can give them to launch them into the world of adulthood so that they have the best opportunity to be successful. And the truth is, what you all have going on right now here with all hands raised is really incredible. I mean, just the workshop here today, the energy in the room, I got to step into a couple rooms this morning, and just the energy that's in the room, and then as I saw people come in today, is really impressive. And it's something that's messy, it's hard, it requires incredible trust and communication, but a real commitment to outcomes for our children. It's something that, as we're looking at it across the state, we're trying to replicate. Where we see good things happening in the state right now, we want to replicate those like crazy. And so we have regional achievement collaboratives that we're scaling up now across the state, and All Hands Raised is a great mentor to each one of those regional achievement compacts as they're doing their work. And so what you all are doing here is great and incredible for kids in Portland, but it's also having an impact on every kid in the state of Oregon. So I just want to congratulate you for the good work that you have underway.
So I had a memory as you were talking about the need for schools to do whatever needs to be done for a particular kid. I was at Principal for a Day a couple of weeks ago, which is an event organized by All Hands Raised that takes community leaders into the schools to see what's happening there. And I was at an elementary school that has a student who can only be at school for 2 hours, who can only be at school for 2 hours a day. So every day at 10 o'clock, the vice principal, and another adult in that school drives that student home every day at 10 o'clock. And it seems, as I hear you, the description of this program is about the community meeting the schools at the edges. We're also talking about schools meeting the communities at their edges and actually trying to dissolve those edges a little bit, like a vice principal driving a kid to school.
Absolutely. The more that we can blur those lines and make sure that we know that we're all responsible and that we all have a part to play, I think the better the outcome is going to be for kids.
Great. Thank you. Dan, similar question, just slightly different phrasing. You've been helping to lead this work for the last 6 years as CEO of All Hands Raised and the Portland Public Schools Foundation before that. And as we've heard, All Hands Raised is increasingly receiving recognition at a national and a statewide level. To you, what is it that makes this work different? And for you as the leader of this effort, how do you know that you're succeeding?
So I think what's different is the way it was built, and you alluded to it earlier, that the community said that we want this. And there was not a mandate that came from on high. There wasn't a large foundation that said, here's your big gift. You have 3 years to figure this out. And we'll probably split after 3 years. Good luck with that. And so it's bubbled up, if you will. And so looking in the room today, y'all look quite nice, is it's a bigger crowd than 4 years ago and a bigger crowd than 2 years ago. And it's because they split into those rooms that you were talking about earlier, and we were talking about action. I also think what's different, I say this to my staff when they come back from meetings and they say, wow, that meeting had a lot of tension in it. And I'm like, good, that's great. Our meetings do have a lot of tension because it's about the adults really getting out of the way and focusing on the fact that it's urgent for us to have these authentic conversations about the kids we've been failing. And if any of us had the silver bullet, then we wouldn't be in this position right now. So how do we keep listening to one another and then align ourselves with the best practice? And seldom does the person that come in the room that thinks they're the smartest leave feeling that way. At least that's our hope, because it's the room that's smart. And it takes a lot of willingness to lean into that. And I said it earlier, I think also there's the word willingness. We've moved from, Portland likes to meet, you all know that. City Club, you do a good job of reminding us of that, and it's not a bad thing. But we kind of have a habit of being the community that likes to gather and be of interest. Oh, that's interesting. Let's vision that. Let's plan that. Let's do a Portlandia series on that. And we're actually doing implementation. So we're doing action. In the last 2 years, that's what we've been experiencing. And so hats off to Portland that we are proving that we can also be that city that does action together. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Carmen, for a second. So as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, our community is blessed with a really strong nonprofit sector. We have many wonderful community organizations and programs. And more of those nonprofits are interested in partnering with schools and improving outcomes like graduation rates and third-grade reading. But partnerships aren't easy. Vim this morning talked about partnerships, and I think we all like the idea of partnerships. We all get that partnerships are good, but they're not easy. And in fact, if they're working well, they're often not easy. And in this area in particular, because of cultural and systemic reasons, there can be some pretty deep divides between sectors and organizations. Can you talk about your experience trying to bridge the divide between nonprofits and schools, and also between dominant culture institutions and culturally specific community-based organizations?
That's a big question.
I know.
Well, I'll give a little bit of an example that I shared in an earlier panel today, which is the example of our partnership with Shaver Elementary in the Park Row School District. It really starts with leadership, and the leadership of the school, of the district, really sets the tone and helps create the welcoming environment, the inclusiveness that families and children actually do experience when they walk in the door. When you see yourself reflected in the celebrations in the school, or you know that you don't have to be asking consistently for information that is pertinent to your child in your native language. Those are symbols of the way that schools can be more inclusive and set the tone for partnership. But it's also making an effort to engage with families, and you need to one of our great leaders in the coalition likes to say that you just don't talk about equity, you fund equity. You actually go through your budget and you prioritize based on that equity lens, based on the students that you need to reach out and serve most. And that should be your driver when you're considering where to prioritize your resources. And we all know resources are scarce, but it's a reality that this is, the generation that is going to be leading very soon. And so we need to make those investments now. That is the priority. How we do this, it's been a long road, and there are many ways to do it, but the long and short of it is dialogue, being willing and open to hearing new things, or to considering a reality that is very different from yours, that is a reality that has been in place for generations, for for many, many communities that have been disenfranchised or marginalized and underserved. So also being willing to change the way that you do things for the good of these children that we're all jointly responsible for. So patience, I would say, is probably the number one ingredient that you need.
Thank you. I think we have a few more minutes before we open it up for questions. This one I'm going to ask for all of you. I'll ask each of you to respond to it. We at All Hands Raised have increasingly been talking about 3 critical aspects of doing work like this. It's the head, heart, hands metaphor, which I'm sure many of you have raised. The head work is the thinking, the planning, the visioning. The heart work is the emotional connection, what draws you to this work, what makes it meaningful, what makes you put in the hours and the energy that you put in. And the handwork is the action, and you need the head and the heart in order to really translate into the hands and the action. So for each of you, what in your own personal narrative and experience drives you to want to do this work? And I need to ask you to do it in a minute or less. And we'll start with you, Rob.
Oh, that's a hard. I have a tendency to start with heart anyway, so and then try to engage the rest of it. But when I was, we moved to Salem when I was in 2nd grade. I was the new kid in class, and there was this really fun, bright, talented kid in my class named Tomas, and he and I became best friends. And my mom would let me ride to the edge of our neighborhood on my bike in the afternoon. And one time I talked her into letting me ride outside the edge of my neighborhood with Tomas. And so we rode to Tomas's house. And I spent the afternoon there, and then when I went home that evening, I could tell that my mom knew I was upset because I was. And she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I was at Tomas's house today, and I didn't like it very much. It was not like ours. It was a harder house than ours." I went back, and as a 2nd grader, I knew, and you're 8 years old, 7 years old, I knew that I had opportunities in my lifetime that Tomas was never going to have, and that wasn't fair because he was smart and funny and talented, probably more so than I was, and I didn't think that he was going to have the same opportunity that I had. About 3 days later, Tomas didn't come to school, and I later realized, as I grew up a little bit and continued to look in that neighborhood, that Tomas's house was actually a house in a migrant labor camp, and so of course Tomas had moved. And I have thought about him 1,000 times as I do my work, and I still think about him every day. And the last part for me is, I want every kid to have equal opportunity. Every kid needs to have the opportunity that I had, and every Tomas needs to have the opportunity that I had.
Well, I'm originally from Hillsboro, Oregon, and my parents were part of migrant farm labor that used to come up through Texas up to Northern California and in Western Washington County every single year before finally settling there. And even though my family was very hardworking, education was always very important to the family. On my mom's side, she had 11 brothers and sisters and had to stop going to school as one of the older children to work to help provide for the family and get her GED. And my dad had a similar situation as well. So they were always very encouraging of me to stay in school, to study, to go to college, even though no one in our family had gone to college before. They were always making sure that they prioritized that time for me. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I do now. And especially that's really informed the work that I do. And so I'll just say one little quick thing about this family. This father, his name is Genaro, and he has a 3-year-old daughter named Itzel, 4-year-old daughter named Itzel. And last year at Glen Fair, he had heard about our Glen Fair Juntos Aprendemos program, and he had registered too late. And so he came the first day of class, and we had to turn him away. Our program staff turned him away and said, "No, I'm sorry, you're too late." And he said, "Well, can I come if one of the students drops out?" She said, "You can come. We'll let you know." He showed up every day at the start of class with his daughter for 3 weeks, waiting to see if the class was full or not. on the 4th week, he came again. It was pouring rain. He was checking, to see. And the staff decided, you know what, we're just going to let this guy and his daughter in. So they started attending the Juntos Aprendemos program, and we accommodated him. But that story, hearing about that story from my staff, it was just incredible for me. And it's a reminder. It reminds me of my parents. It reminds me of how the dogged dedication that parents have to ensuring that their kids are successful and achieve a different, better life for themselves, and that they're willing to sacrifice their time to make sure that their children have that shot in life. So that's what keeps me going every day. I think about little kids like Itzel and parents like my parents and like Genaro.
Just a couple of quick points. The first one, there's been a lot of talk here about participation and getting people at the table. Somebody told me the other day, if you're not at the table, it probably means you're on the menu. And I think that is really true. And I experienced that in a way. My first job in the United States was working with minority and low-income communities. And we try to work to bring them jobs and have economic development type of activities. And it started out very much as this model of, people from the university, I'm here to help you. And in the course of just a very short time, I learned that that's probably not the best way to do this work, and that it needs to be done in a way where people are part of it. So what motivated me was this sense of working on one area and seeing that even if we could say create jobs, the people from the community would point out that, well, they probably didn't have the skills to take those jobs. So yeah, there'd be a job now in their community, but be somebody from outside the community who got that job. And even if we got some of the people maybe into a school program or whatever, there would be things happening in their own lives, health crisis, a family crisis, whatever it might be, the street not being safe. So that unless we were able to address all of these various issues, and again, you wouldn't get that in a gut feel until we actually sat down with the community and talked about all these things. And that's what I've loved about this work, that it recognizes that it affects the whole person, the whole child, and that means the community and the family. It's not isolated, it's not, segmented. So that's what keeps me going and making me feel very much that, yeah, while I'm at the university, which is sort of, at the end of that pipeline, that it is the collective effort.
So this morning, a lot of us that were here this morning got to hear from a student at PSU. Her name is Jenny, and she's a fellow Roosevelt alum. I'm a Roosevelt alum, so I get to plug that. And she graduated from high school, and now she's went to PCC, then to high school. And her older brother, he didn't do so well. He dropped out in 9th grade. And so they came from similar, obviously, circumstances at home, but one was able to succeed and one is really struggling. And she used the word that someone saw me. My older sister saw me, a relative in the school saw me, and that kept me motivated. And I'm the youngest of 8, and I have 6 older brothers, and I was the first in my family to graduate from high school. Things were unstable at home from 6th grade to my sophomore year. My parents married and divorced one another twice, so they clearly loved each other. But there were addictions and mental health issues at home that were really extreme. And so right now, 3 of my brothers have had a short life, because mental health illness usually means you have a short life. And so why did I succeed? Or, well, who knows if I succeed. Why am I sitting here today? Everyone in my staff's glaring at me. You're not that successful. Anyway, I'm here today because Miss Friedel in freshman year took this dyslexic kid and said, well, you like sports, so write about sports. And I became the sports editor of the newspaper. A PE teacher in 7th grade, God, I wish we had really robust PE and for all boys in 6th through 8th grade, right? He noticed I could run fast, so I joined the track team. So I had to stay busy. The home life wasn't good, but there were a lot of great adults out there that would see me. And so I had to surround myself with that. That motivates me today because I know that all of these kids have potential, and we have to figure it out and not blame it on the parents or the one school or whatever we've done in the past, but how can we all knit this together and make sure that these are all of our kids and that they can all succeed.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing those stories. I think that we are now at the question and answer time. So we are going to open up to the question and answer portion of the program. If you have a written question on an index card, please hold it up high so that City Club staff can collect it from you. We'll take questions from the audience. As always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a benefit of City Club membership, and membership is open to everyone. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less, and I've been given discretion to cut you off if you go on for more than that in asking your question. And also, I will read at least one index card question as well. So if you have a question, please come on up to the microphone.
Over here.
Oh, thank you, sorry.
Hi, I'm Gavin White. I'm a City Club member. I appreciate all of you on this panel for being with us today and giving us the opportunity to get to know you a little better. I can feel your heart. I appreciate the diversity of you as panelists in a way that I didn't when I first saw you gathering up there. It looked to me like we had 3 older white guys who are likely coming from privileged backgrounds and leading these great organizations doing amazing stuff. But I sat there wondering, and I'm still wondering, and I'm thinking maybe you can teach me something that I can bring to the people I work with, the businesses that I help and serve. How are you fostering ethnic and racial equity in your organizations, in your staff, and on your boards, and in your top executive management, so that people can look at the organization and know that they are represented there?
I'd be happy to start out because it's actually very powerful that you heard earlier that All Hands Raised works through what are called collaboratives that focus on different areas. So one focuses on equity and disparities. And the first thing that collaborative did was, rather than sort of figuring out how to tell other people how to do things, they said, how are our own organizations that are represented around that table, how are we doing on equity? And they put together a self-assessment. And they said, if you want to be at this table to help figure out how we can collectively become better, we should first look at ourselves. And each of those organizations took that self-assessment, or they, in some cases, already had a diversity plan in place, so started talking about that. And probably there are others who can talk more about the specific detail. I know that at Portland State, just very briefly, the way we did it, in a large organization, you put somebody in charge, right? If I'm the only one talking about it, ain't gonna happen. You know, you need somebody who's in charge. So we created a position for Chief Diversity Officer 4 years ago, who was then it wasn't her responsibility to do it all, but it became her responsibility to lead the effort and make sure that everybody else was living up to the commitments that were already in the institution.
Also, I'd like to add, for over 5 years, the board of All Hands Raised, there's over 20 people, and at least 50% are always from members of communities of color. And I think the culture starts at the board level, and so we've been very intentional about that.
I'd be happy to. So one of the things that I'm really proud of at OEIB, the Oregon Education Investment Board, and at the department is that we created an equity lens, an equity document that we have now that we've shared really with many organizations across the state, and people have adopted this as their document, their policy around equity. And we're working really hard that anytime we're going to make any decision or think about any kind of initiative, that we run it through that lens and make sure that we're being really thoughtful and intentional about ensuring that anything that we do is going to help close opportunity or achievement gaps for kids in the state of Oregon. And that's a really important component. We also have set very specific goals within our strategic plan about what our expected outcomes are for all students in the state, but especially around closing gaps. And we're beginning to, I believe, get some traction on that. And anything that we put out is very intentional about ensuring that we begin to close those. The State Board of Education, I see Samuel Henry here this afternoon, is about as diverse a board as you will find in the state of Oregon. There are 7 members, 6 are people of color, and they do an unbelievable job of representing students in the state. We've been very intentional about making sure that we diversify the workforce at the department. Our goal is that people who work at the department represent the diversity of students in the state. It's the only way that we can have the collective knowledge and thought to begin to even approach what we need to be doing in order to appropriately educate kids in the state of Oregon. We have doubled the diversity at the department, and we intend, quite honestly, to not be but to be the employer of choice for people of color in the state of Oregon. And I want you all to hear that because we're recruiting. So, thank you.
I just want to say something about the work of the Coalition of Communities of Color and the sort of a takeoff on what Vim was talking about. Looking internally is critical. That's a critical first step. And so I would suggest that you visit the website of the Coalition of Communities of Color to check out the assessment tool, the racial equity assessment tool. It is something that was developed out of this collaborative work that you see up here, and that multiple organizations, businesses, institutions, nonprofits are using, foundations are using to look internally, assess where you fall, where your gaps are, and what you're doing well. By virtue of going through the process itself, it leads to rich dialogue within your organizational culture about why you don't do things, or, oh, I'd never thought of that, or it will feel daunting, but it's actually great work that you're taking that first step. So please check that out on the website.
Thank you all.
My name is Dave Porter. I'm a City Club member. I have a question about how Oregon's going to get the teachers it needs. The 2014 Oregon Minority Teacher Act status report says that 21.5% of Oregon public school students in 2012-13 were Hispanics. Yet only 3.6 of Oregon teachers were Hispanics. In 2012-13, again, just 3.9 of the new initial licensed teachers in Oregon were Hispanics. If the best way to get Hispanic students engaged in school and to graduate is to have dual language immersion programs in Spanish, how are we going to get the teachers we need? Thank you.
There's definitely a pipeline issue. All I can say is we have the dean of our School of Education here. He could probably tell me how many of our students in the School of Ed are Latino. I know that of our entering freshmen, 42% are of underrepresented minorities. The vast majority of those are Latino. So we are working on that pipeline. In the end, that will show up at the teachers, but there's no doubt that there's a long way to go.
I do know that we are in partnership with Portland State on some of the work around that and making sure that we work on the pipeline. We do have a really long way to go. I think that there are a number of components around that. Some of it is really the kinds of messages that we send to children while they're still in school about who their teacher is and what their job looks like, and how we value that. And so we want to make sure that we're sending good messages about that. I know that there are a number of districts in the state that have begun some internships with students and are intentional about ensuring that they're attracting students of color into those kinds of internships around what it's like to be a teacher and how to do some of that work. We have a couple of initiatives that we started out of the last legislative session that are intentional about attempting to do some of that kind of recruitment and to cover some of the costs of the schooling that people incur as they move on to be a teacher. I think that we also have some real barriers in our Teachers' Standards and Practices Commission that we need to look at and think about and to remove some of those barriers, that there are some really highly qualified folks around the state who have a hard time moving through some of those barriers, and they're ones that are really not acceptable for us to have. And lastly, and this is something I found as a superintendent, there are a number of people in the state who are people of color who have done everything that they need to do, that have graduated through teacher program, that have their license through TSPC, that go to get hired in places that are not able to secure jobs. And there's a lot of parts to that. One of the parts I know is that when we put together, schools are really famous for trying to think about how we do things through process as well. I appreciated that about Portland. I know it's true, and schools are that way too. And when we go through selection processes in school, we need to make sure that we're really thoughtful about what those selection processes look like, who sits on the selection committee, and what it is that we're looking for. We need to know that we're looking for the kind of possibility that comes through the teacher that helps their children be successful, and the children that we have in the state of Oregon be successful in the classroom. And we've got to do a better job of setting up our selection processes, both for teachers and even more specifically for administrators in the state.
Andrew Mason, City Club member, and this wasn't prearranged, I'll have you know, but I appreciate hearing. I think it's also what you're not looking for. So a couple summers back at Open Meadow, we hired, as part of our annual routine of hiring, we hired 8 men of color, 7 of whom had a criminal background that showed up. Do we have the courage? My question is, do we have the courage, I would say at the state level in particular, to get our young black men out of prison, young deserving black men out of prison, and into the front of classrooms where we so badly need them and where they belong? Do we have the courage?
Well, thank goodness I'm not going to be put on the spot at all. I think it's a really great question. And the truth is, we're dealing with some of those situations right now. And we have rules in place about criminal background checks that people theoretically really like. And then when you begin to see how that starts to play out, you know that there have to be some mechanisms that look deeper at the situation and have other consideration that isn't as simple as yes and no. And so we're thinking that we need to begin to provide districts with some latitude about that. And I know that we have a review process now in place at the Department of Ed where we take a look at those on more individual basis, and a panel of people who look at that and try to think about it a little bit differently. And so hopefully, as we do that work, we'll be really thoughtful, make sure we have the right place on the decision-making group, and we have a tension there about making sure that we're keeping our kids safe, which is what the rules were put in place to do, but then also making sure that we don't disadvantage in a way or even say, hey, this person, yes, they have a history, but they also are a really good exemplar about what it looks like to look at yourself, take control of your life, and say, I'm going to be a different person than I was, and I want you to join me in being an upstanding, contributing person. And so there's a lot to that, and I don't think that we're perfect yet on it. We've got a little bit more work to do on that, but we are moving in the right direction with it, and I appreciate you bringing that up, and it will even propel it even further into my psyche, into some of the work that we do. Thanks.
So I am going to, we're starting to run out of time here. I'm going to have to take a question from an index card. How will you work with students who fall into the shadows because of their documentation and make sure that they're included in the racial equity analysis? Who'd like to start?
I'll start in the context of my own organization, that we work with the Latino community. This is a very common situation, working with undocumented students and undocumented families. We just encourage them to continue in their education because they are a valuable contributing citizen in this community. They have something to offer this community, their community. We also, as much as we can, help them navigate the system and bring them out of the shadow as much as we possibly can. we engage them civically. You don't have to be able to vote to contribute civically to your community and support causes and issues that you believe in, as we evidenced recently with Measure 88. I think within the context of that, we are very limited. We cannot pretend it's not as challenging as it is. It's hard to explain to a child who is brilliant and deserving of every opportunity in life that they are limited because of their legal status. It is just wrong. And we're looking forward to the day where that changes.
Dan?
Some of the highest rates of absenteeism, of course, is with communities of new arrivals. And one of the collaboratives is focused on this. And I'm going to also then loop this into what's amazing about this work, because it is about breaking the silos down and thinking about things differently. So we all know about DHS, Department of Health Services. And they usually have been deployed at their desk in some lovely bureaucratic building, and then they go and meet with the families, or the families are afraid to meet with them because sometimes there's a lot of fear because perhaps they're undocumented. Imagine this, at our 6 demonstration site schools, those DHS workers are now in the school, and they're learning how to work with the educators and, more importantly, with the communities. And so the hope is that within a year, those communities won't feel like they're coming at their kids with that fear, but in fact, they'll know that they're working with them. And this is an example where there wasn't one penny of taxpayers' dollars that was spent on this. It was the fact that we were getting smarter about how to break down a silo and be more efficient with how we work together. All of these dots are connected.
Thank you.
We have run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. As we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to today's guests, our moderators, SUSHEELA JAYAPAL, and our panelists, Carmen Rubio, Vim Vival, Rob Saxton, and Dan Ryan.